You're listening to Atoms, Motion, and the Void. I'd been working for the Stalwarts for several years, surreptitiously recording the conversations or audio atmospheres of persons of interest, when I was informed of a shift in my status with the secret organization. My recording days, so it seemed, were over, and a new kind of ultra-discreet but slightly more dangerous observation commenced. The weekly stipend Mr. Branson paid out for my recordings had kept me in a warm bed. But, after a time, with a little stage success, I did grow a bit more financially secure, and rather than moonlighting this second job, I found myself with a satisfying, if guilt-hung, hobby. But as I say, my recording days were soon ended. Although Branson generally knew of my coming visits, I did sometimes show up unannounced, and at such times found him to be quite ill-prepared to meet me. For one, I did occasionally note what looked to be a pair of silvery bracelets, handcuffs locked over his right wrist in the darkness of his sleeves. In addition, I would at such times find him seated on his office chair, with what looked to be a series of chains running over his legs, as though there would be some wild danger were he free. He did his best to hide the handcuffs and the leg chains from me, lowering his arm, or pulling a ready-to-hand shawl down over his legs for cover. But the fact of these restraints remained. The few times I did see him out of doors, I noted an increasing kilter to his sick man's walk, as though his goiter were flooding his bad leg with particular vengeance. Yet, despite this, he maintained a lightness on his feet, and combined with his sick, rickety shuffle, turned in a kind of weightless, swinging, marionette-like performance, both heavy and light. Because our relationship had become so strictly lacking an informal dimension, and because I had not seen him out of doors in so long, and had so recently regularly seen him bound to his office chair with his hidden handcuffed wrist, and even despite his initial inference that these items bore some connection to his goiter, I was as surprised to find him at my door as I would to find a bear or tiger in my closet. His breath was heaving and his lips quivering as I let him in. His sick man's walk was even more pronounced, and a florid, damp heat pulsed off his body. I had never considered him a friendly or even likable man, but a businessman with very little excess time, sustaining 1,000,000 small stresses, yet created to bear just such a weight. His once red hair was now foiled silver, and the original beef-eater yellow-red of his face was tinged to a pre-death ash-green. All this wash out in only a few years. He limped and flowed down my hall in his ghost-like fashion, and I took him into my sitting room. "Time for you to start up with your Hanaliken, Sherwin." He huffed this out against weak lungs. I didn't offer to take his coat, as I knew he wouldn't give it. As he sat, I saw the glimmering silver of the handcuffs swing down his right wrist. He made no move to hide the cuffs, and instead set a manila folder on top of his briefcase. I allowed his mysterious word, Hanaliken, to blow not a wrinkle on my expression, even while I hunted its meaning in my mind. Since our initial meeting, I had felt somewhat at a loss with Branson, as though he were operating with a much more complete and comprehensive playbook than I, as though he'd been briefed on the bigger picture. And this was not my experience in any other relationship. It was usually I who had the deeper, broader grasp, the confidence and security of being the finer tuned and more deeply anchored. It was displeasing to my sense of self to play second dog to Branson. But It is the way of nature, and my tight-fisted feelings express the conflict of instinct as against ego. I set 2 glasses down, still murmuring the word, Hanalekin, Hanalekin, napkin, murdering it to variations. As I began to pour us a drink, he called out, "No, thanks. Drunk already, Sherwin." As drink had always seemed the remedy to his melancholy, it was strange to have them now enfolding, his sadness and his drunkenness, the latter not driving off the former as before. I poured his scotch into mine, and moved guardedly to take my position on the sofa across from him. "Let's just do this and I'll go. I've got a lot of work left to do today, and then I'm gone." "Where are you headed?" I said. "I'm sending off, elsewhere, Sherwin, elsewhere. To Bolly High." "Bolly High," I said. "You've read the book, Sherwin. You know what to expect. Your work now will be with the Hanalekin, and you'll be reporting to this fellow." Branson tapped the manila folder, upon which was stapled a very small sepia photo of an elderly black man. "Name's Doppler, and the address is inside. He'll be expecting you next week and on a weekly basis until you seem comfortable with your new level." My new level. I said nothing. Instantly, I gathered that I had moved up in the organization, graduated, as it were. A nasty, too close to danger feeling raised in my stomach. "You're to turn in your recording device and any tapes you have to him. He'll pay you, of course." Branson shot the clasps of his briefcase and opened it. He removed a cardboard shirt box and pushed it toward me. "It used to be mine long ago," he said. There was no hint of pride, no hint of care. It was just a relatable fact. I trucked the cardboard top off and pulled out a black shirt made of a very fine, stretchable fabric. Beneath the shirt lay a set of what seemed like pants, but, as I lifted them out, revealed themselves to be tights. Then again, beneath this cool-to-the-touch garment, I found a pair of leather-feeling gloves and a set of black, ballet-like slippers. Inside the left slipper, I found a small fabric ball. "Head mask," Branson said. "It doesn't look like you can breathe through that headpiece, but you can. It's not itchy either. I got to wearing the whole thing at home sometimes or in the office. It closes down the senses a little, the seeing, the hearing, the smelling, but somehow sharpens them. One has to reach a little harder, concentrate, and that makes you peaceful. Did you know that, Sherwin?" "No," I said weakly. I folded the cat burglar suit back into the box in an uncomfortable way, as though I had some intention of not accepting it. "You should put it on. Put it on and go out," he said. "Start as soon as you can. Tonight. I'm supposed to make sure you do, but I don't have time. I am correct to so entrust you." He raised his entire being toward me, like a guillotine ready to fall on the wrong answer. "Of course," I said. I uncomfortably sipped my drink. "I will put it on and go out right after you leave," I said. "Wait till dark, obviously," Branson said, shutting the briefcase. "We're done, Sherwin," he said. He stood up. I could have sworn that his upward momentum lifted him from the ground. "Good knowing you. Keep up the good work." "I will," I said, throat full of questions. Where was Branson going? What was I supposed to do with my new costume? What sort of reports was I to file with Doppler? Branson was at the door. "It's all in the book, Sherwin, if you've forgotten." "The book," I said, in a strange, dreamy tone, half question, half acknowledgement, as though to say, "Oh, yes, of course," and "I've never heard of it," simultaneously. "Streamlines of the Futurist," Branson said. I stared at him with a hard face. "The training manual, Sherwin. I gave it to you the first day we met." "Oh, yes," I said. "I read it, and then I hid it away." "As you should. All but forget it until you need it. That's a good policy." Branson nodded sharply at me, made a little wave, understating the finality of this being our last visit, and left. Had I been laboring under the auspices of the Stalwarts, void absolutely of understanding it or my purpose, when all along there had been some book describing the organization, its tenets and goals, and possibly my role in it. I got myself into the Honolican in a matter of minutes. I stood in the full costume, blouse, tights, gloves, slippers, and mask. There was a pleasant ingathering to the outfit, a springy tightness that made me feel light of limb. The fabric over my eyes acted more as a polarizing filter, blocking glare rather than limiting sight. Even though I had pieced together an all-black image of myself, I was still shocked to see my reflection in the hall mirror. I was a shadow come to life. There was something oddly flat in my appearance. Visually, I had never been more nullified. While I didn't know what goal the Honolican was meant to assist, I did know how I would use it that night. I waited a few more hours until a full darkness came to the city, before sneaking out into the building's shadows and heading down the long alley and across the boardwalk near the water toward Branson's office, where I hoped to relieve him of the burden of his copy, of what I was already thinking of as my copy, of Streamlines, of the Futurist. Even at the best, most normal of times, entering Branson's office felt like a violation of some kind. He was always shuffling papers out of view, his frozen eyes tracking mine the moment I entered, as though to keep my gaze from picking at his things. So, it was ill-making to be standing in a midnight air, 15 feet below his lit office window, with the intention of shortly climbing in. The window was slightly cracked open, and I could hear the shuffling sounds of Branson still packing, of heavy boxes stacked, of papers being spilled across the floor, of small glassy things tossed carelessly together. There was an iron-black spear fence, 6 or 7 feet high, going around the property. The doorpiece that opened onto the stone walkway that led to the office steps had always remained shoved crookedly back and teetered away as though shearing its hinges. As I waited for Branson to complete his job, I tried the fence door and found the hinges rusted off, and while very heavy, it was simply leaning askew into the fence proper. I quietly carried it over and set it beneath the office window, and then managed to get myself onto its upper crossbar. From here, I could barely get my fingers on Branson's window ledge. But it was enough, and I raised myself with an awkward pull-up and peered in. In the center of the room was an enormous pile of loose papers and books, almost as tall as Branson, who was moving very slowly from a file cabinet with an armful of what must be the last of his personal files. As he dropped this batch, I saw that he'd come to a stop near a black metal sphere that looked to be an oversized cannonball with a large metal eyelet welded to one side. He stood for a moment before removing his ever-present hat and coat, which he tossed onto the paper and book pile. He excerpted a necklace and took from it a small key, which he inserted into one of the handcuff bracelets. He leaned down and quickly attached one handcuff bracelet to the eyelet of the sphere, effectively locking himself to it. He took the ball with difficulty up into his arms and stood, and then took a cigar from his ashtray, puffed it twice, and then tossed it onto the pile, which must have been doused with something flammable as it caught up rapidly into a blaze. Branson shuffled toward his office door, great ball held to his chest, and as he did so, I lifted myself into the window, heading, for the second time in my life, to play with the great and furious fire.
Everything you see is meant to be, not believed. Everything you do is what will never be known. Everyone you meet is not to be deceiving. Everyone you don't may be safely ignored. I wish you could choose, but the fireman's waiting to usher you into a hole in the floor. I wish you could make of it more in the making. I wish you could make it more and more. Everything you see is meant to be, not believed. Everything you do is what will never be known. Everyone you meet is not to be deceiving. Everyone you don't may be safely ignored. I wish you could choose, but the fireman's waiting to usher you into a hole in the floor. I wish you could make of it more in the making. I wish you could make it more and more.
Branson had only just shut the office door as I began kicking at his flaming pyre of secrets. There was a decorative fireplace in the office and the requisite poker and firebrush, and I grabbed the former and began winching at the pile and its papers, searching for the book. I knocked one book out and stomped its flaming surface. I read the title, Mass Observation by Charles Madge. I went back to the pile, still hitting and digging. I twisted another flaming volume out. The Rule Book of Calendars was its title, by Harvey Porter. The heat was almost unbearable, but again I felt that the Hanalikan had some extra special tendency. I hit hard at the inferno, throwing fireballs about the room, until I saw it glistening, its title burning silver-orange letters at me, Streamlines of the Futurist. The author had been burned off. I grabbed it with my gloved hand and stomped it with both feet like a madman. I quickly gathered the 3 fire-smothered books into a smoldering stack under my arm and ran for the door. I caught my breath in the quiet hall. The grandfather clock in the waiting room ticked, and the dark furniture slept, and all would be atomized in a matter of hours by Branson's fire. I rushed down the flight of steps and was just about to heave through the door when I saw Branson on the far side of the fence, gazing toward his office window. He was still struggling to hold on to the cannonball. He turned slowly around and looked down over the street, as though bidding it farewell. Then he glanced back at the window, at the building, a final glance, even seeming to look toward me in the darkened door, before he fidgeted the small key back into the lock of the handcuffs and undid his wrist. He looked upward into the stars, dropped the ball, and watched it roll off down the soft grade of the sidewalk, heavy and cement-sounding. And with the softened speed of a helium balloon, Branson began to float upward into the sky.
Hold still. Haven't eyes to see below, nor the heart to really know what causes everything. When you fall into pieces, the burden increases, a helpless release, and then down into silence you go. haven't found a boat to row. Not brave enough to peek below at what causes everything. When you fall into pieces, the burden increases, a helpless release, and then down into silence you go.
I stood outside the burning office building, watching him lift away into the sky, until, in a sudden blur, he blinked away. I do not remember walking home. I remember setting the books down on my coffee table. I remember a tall glass of iron-tasting tap water. I didn't look at the books for a few moments as my shaking hands tended a bottle of scotch. I did not examine either the mass observation book or the rule book of calendars, but instead went straight to Streamlines of the Futurist. I rubbed at the space where the author's name had been burned away and opened the book. The first sentence read, "As we have now determined, time comes from the future." I flipped to the index, found an entry for Hanaliken, which guided me back to some midpoint in the book where I read, "The Hanaliken will offer the necessary camouflage to assist the Stalwart in his field of observation as assigned by his overseer. The Stalwart operating in the Hanaliken class will now have the duty to deeply observe a person, place, or thing." I tried to shut the book, but did so with such vigor that the cover snapped from its fire-weakened binding. I took another drink from my bottle, and, against my deepest desire, my eye came to settle on the coverless book. A feeling, infinitely wide and infinitely small, imploded inside me. A feeling that I had never felt before, that no words could grace. On the exposed, blackened title page, I read, "Streamlines of the Futurist, a Stalwart compendium, dictionary, encyclopedia, and guidebook, as organized and edited by Sherwin Sleeves." You've been listening to Atoms, Motion, and the Void.